Imagine waking up one morning to discover that your smartphone won't update, your favorite AI assistant stops working, or your company's supply chain completely halts, all because of an invisible war happening behind the screens and servers that power our modern lives. Far from battlefields, a new kind of conflict is raging, a battle for dominance over the world's most critical technology, the microchip. And the ripple effects promise to transform the way you live, work, and connect with the world. The question is, who will win the secret chip war, and what will it mean for the future of innovation and your everyday life? Chances are you've heard the name Huawei. You may even know it as a smartphone brand, or the spark for heated debate about 5G networks. But what's really at stake goes far beyond smartphones and internet speed. At the heart of the US-China rivalry lies a tiny yet mighty piece of technology, the semiconductor, or microchip, that's become the backbone of not just phones, but everything from AI to electric cars, medical equipment, and even national defense systems. This war isn't fought with tanks or missiles. It's waged with regulations, trade embargoes, billion-dollar research budgets, secret R&D labs, and an escalating race to build the fastest, most powerful, and most secure chips in the world. The front lines run through gleaming factories in Taiwan and South Korea, the coding dens of Silicon Valley, and the rapidly growing R&D centers of Shenzhen and Beijing. And the next move could redefine not just global economics, but the entire architecture of the digital future. So what just happened to send shockwaves through this landscape? Last week, the U.S. Commerce Department issued a stern warning. Using Huawei's AI-focused Ascend chips anywhere in the world could violate American export controls. In the blink of an eye, this guidance drew new red lines for global tech companies and governments, igniting fury in Beijing, confusion in European capitals, and anxiety across the entire supply chain. China's immediate response was sharp. Officials accused the U.S. of sabotaging delicate trade talks and undermining the spirit of recent negotiations. According to the Chinese Commerce Ministry, these U.S. measures seriously undermine the consensus reached at the high-level talks between China and the U.S. in Geneva. Beijing demanded Washington correct its mistakes, making it clear this was not just another technical squabble. It was a critical battleground in the ongoing tech standoff. At first glance, this might sound like a battle of bureaucrats and boardrooms, but the stakes couldn't be higher. Semiconductors are the oil of the 21st century economy. Their supply, or sudden disruption, can make or break entire industries. And the Huawei case isn't a one-off, but a chapter in a much broader, deeply entangled story of ambition, fear, and global power. How did we get to this point where a single company's chips can set off a geopolitical firestorm? To understand, we need to rewind several years, to the roots of the US-China tech trade war. As China's tech sector surged in the 2010s, American policymakers grew increasingly wary. The CHIPS Act of 2022 funneled billions into domestic chip manufacturing, aiming to reduce dependence on Asian suppliers after pandemic-era shortages exposed just how vulnerable Western supply chains had become. Meanwhile, the Export Control Reform Act of 2018 gave Washington sweeping authority to restrict high-tech exports, especially those with military or dual-use potential. Huawei became the flashpoint. Since 2019, the company has faced escalating sanctions, blacklists, and lobbying campaigns that pressured U.S. allies, especially in Europe, to ban Huawei equipment from 5G networks. The official rationale? National security, and the fear that Chinese-made networks could become tools of espionage or cyber warfare. Beijing, for its part, saw these moves as economic protectionism, an attempt to stifle China's rise, block its access to advanced Western tech, and slow its bid for leadership in AI and other cutting-edge fields. It's not just about chips for smartphones. The fight has spilled into every layer of the digital stack: cloud computing infrastructure, robotics, quantum computing, AI training, and more. Under the Made in China 2025 initiative, Beijing funneled tens of billions into domestic R&D, hoping to make its chip industry not just self-sufficient, but world-leading within a decade. This ambition has sent Washington scrambling to raise new barriers, not only for Chinese companies, but for any global firm caught in the crossfire. The result? Supply chains once considered reliable have grown precarious, costs have shot up, and a new climate of uncertainty prevails, where any regulatory tweak or political tweet can instantly send shockwaves across global markets. In the latest flare-up, the Biden administration had somewhat softened some export restrictions on AI chips. But the Trump administration, looking to re-establish a hard line, reasserted efforts to keep advanced chip technology out of Chinese hands. The message was loud and clear. The U.S. intends to maintain an iron grip on core technologies that could power future AI breakthroughs, both for commercial and national security reasons. Meanwhile, China pushed back not just rhetorically, but with hard cash. In May 2025, Beijing rolled out subsidies covering up to 80% of the cost for domestic firms buying locally made chip-making equipment, a jaw-dropping move to galvanize its homegrown industry in the face of persistent sanctions. Huawei, for its part, ramped up R&D spending by 15% in just the first quarter of 2025, signaling that it's more determined than ever to innovate around U.S. roadblocks and establish itself as a global AI chip champion. As Dan Wong, a leading tech analyst at Gavekal Dragonomics, observes, Huawei's intensified R&D efforts signal a defiant resolve to navigate U.S. sanctions and emerge as a formidable force in the AI chip arena. And they have little choice. The Commerce Department's latest guidance doesn't just affect chips exported from the U.S. By warning that anyone using Huawei Ascend chips could risk violating export controls, Washington is putting pressure on tech firms and governments around the world, not just U.S. companies. The phrase "anywhere in the world" may have been quietly dropped from the formal guidance, but the chilling effect remains. Companies in Europe, the Middle East, even Africa and South America are now scrutinizing their supply chains, wondering, could a single Chinese chip bring down the wrath of the U.S. government? It's no wonder tensions are sky high. As John Neufer, president of the U.S. Semiconductor Industry Association, warns, the spiraling trade friction between the U.S. and China casts a long shadow over the global semiconductor landscape, threatening revenue streams and stifling the very spirit of innovation. And yet, in this high-stakes game, no player can move in isolation. The European Union, for instance, finds itself caught between the world's two tech superpowers. Brussels is pressured by Washington to mirror U.S. chip sanctions, but many in the EU fear that blindly following America's lead could devastate their own export-driven economies and rupture vital trade ties with China. As Hosuke Lee Makiyama, director at the European Center for International Political Economy, puts it, the EU's reluctance to wholeheartedly endorse U.S. chip export controls underscores the intricate economic calculus at play and the imperative to sustain trade ties with China. Emerging markets like Taiwan and South Korea are also feeling the squeeze. Taiwanese chip makers such as TSMC are under immense pressure from Washington to limit their China business, while also facing veiled threats from Beijing not to turn their backs. According to Mark Lee, a semiconductor analyst at Bernstein, Taiwanese firms find themselves on a tightrope, compelled to maintain equilibrium between their U.S. and Chinese alliances to safeguard their market presence. Even Samsung, the South Korean tech titan, is considering a radical move, relocating some production lines out of China to mitigate the risks of getting caught in the geopolitical crossfire. The Korea Herald reports that these deliberations reflect the palpable anxiety surrounding geopolitical risks and the imperative for supply chain diversification. While all this plays out, the global supply chain is fragmenting rapidly. The Semiconductor Industry Association now warns that if the tech Cold War continues on this trajectory, U.S. chip makers could see their revenues plunge by as much as 37% in just the next 2 years. That's not just a boardroom problem, it's a looming threat to jobs, R&D, innovation, and the price and performance of every digital tool you rely on daily. Meanwhile, China's chip sector is showing remarkable resilience, if not outright defiance. Despite, or perhaps because of, Western sanctions, China's semiconductor industry is projected to grow 20% in 2025 alone, boosted by internal demand and generous government support. Beijing's vision, a world where Chinese AI, powered by Chinese chips, can't be held hostage by overseas regulation. But here's the twist. The U.S. Department of Defense is now plowing $500 million into research on radically new chip architectures, to shake off dependence on legacy designs and leapfrog into the next era of microelectronics. With the World Trade Organization poised to rule on the legality of U.S. export controls, the entire global system of trade rules is facing a moment of truth. Will the WTO uphold America's right to control high-tech exports in the name of security? Or will it side with China's claim that these restrictions are nothing more than high-tech protectionism? Behind all these maneuvers lies the ultimate question. Are we heading for a total great decoupling? Two separate rival tech universes, one American-led, one Chinese? Or could there be a third way, with blocs like the EU forging their own path and fostering global cooperation in vital areas like AI and quantum computing. He Yong, professor of economics at Peking University, sums up the stakes. While U.S. export controls may accelerate China's quest for semiconductor self-reliance, the global supply chain will bear the brunt of this fragmented approach. As of today, both sides seem to be digging in for a long siege. On one side, a web of U.S.-led export controls, allied pressure, and defense-funded innovation. On the other, China's state-backed industrial surge, bold R&D investments, and increasingly sophisticated chips made at home. But here's the intrigue. Are these two tech behemoths heading for a point of no return, a split that could fragment the digital world as we know it? Or will mutual dependency, market forces, and multilateral diplomacy pull them back from the brink at the last moment? The next chapters of this chip war will decide not only who commands the engines of AI, automation, and digital infrastructure, but who sets the rules for the future of global innovation. And as the world holds its breath for the WTO's ruling and the next twists in Washington, Beijing, Brussels, and Seoul, a key question hangs in the balance. Is our digital future destined to be fractured, or can a path be found to global cooperation before it's too late? As the world watches the escalating standoff between the United States and China over semiconductors, the stakes have never been higher. The latest guidance from the U.S. Commerce Department, targeting the use of Huawei's Ascend chips even outside American borders, sends a resounding message. The global tech order is in flux. But what comes next? Let's explore the possible futures that could emerge from this high-stakes rivalry, a contest that might just define the 21st century. If current trends hold, we may be on the verge of what experts are already calling the Great Decoupling. National interests are redrawing the maps of technology, production, and trade. Imagine a world split in two, where American and Chinese tech ecosystems operate in parallel, each with its own standards, suppliers, and champions. For consumers and companies worldwide, this could mean higher costs, fewer choices, and headaches as interoperability erodes. Dan Wang, a tech analyst at Gavekal Dragonomics, recently noted, Huawei's intensified R&D efforts signal a defiant resolve to navigate U.S. sanctions and emerge as a formidable force in the AI chip arena. That resolve is already translating into action. In just the first quarter of 2025, Huawei has ramped up its research and development spending by 15%, pouring billions into homegrown chip innovation and alternative manufacturing methods. Beijing isn't sitting on the sidelines. With subsidies covering up to 80% of the costs for domestic firms purchasing China-made chip-making equipment, the country is turbocharging its push for semiconductor self-reliance. State media touts a 20% surge in China's semiconductor sector this year, driven by local demand and powerful government backing. But the road to self-sufficiency isn't straightforward. U.S. policymakers are considering even tighter restrictions, not just on Huawei, but on Chinese memory chip makers across the board. The Department of Defense has earmarked $500 million for research into new chip architectures that could outflank Chinese innovation. This back and forth creates a race where sanctions are met with breakthroughs, and breakthroughs spark new sanctions, a technological arms race with no finish line in sight. Meanwhile, the fallout is global. Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturers, including the crown jewel TSMC, are under mounting pressure from both Washington and Beijing. Mark Lee, a semiconductor analyst at Bernstein, puts it bluntly. Taiwanese firms find themselves on a tightrope, compelled to maintain equilibrium between their U.S. and Chinese alliances to safeguard their market presence. Any false step could have seismic repercussions, especially for industries, from smartphones to electric vehicles, that rely on seamless chip supply. South Korea's Samsung, another giant in the field, is reportedly weighing the relocation of certain production lines out of China. The rationale? Geopolitical uncertainty is now a risk factor that can't be ignored. Kim Jae-min, a leading analyst in Seoul, observes, Samsung's contemplation of relocating production lines underscores the palpable anxiety surrounding geopolitical risks and the imperative for supply chain diversification. Even in Europe, where economic ties with China run deep, there's hesitation about marching in lockstep with U.S. chip export controls. Hosuk Lee Makiyama, director of the European Center for International Political Economy, explains, the EU's reluctance to wholeheartedly endorse U.S. chip export controls underscores the intricate economic calculus at play and the imperative to sustain trade ties with China. This hesitation hints at another possible outcome. Instead of a world breaking into two rigid blocks, we might see a rise in multilateralism. Some experts envision a coalition of nations, with the EU taking a leading role, navigating between Washington and Beijing. Imagine joint research ventures in fields like quantum computing or artificial intelligence, open to talent from both sides. This path could foster global innovation, if, and only if, competing interests can be balanced and trust rebuilt. But let's not underestimate the risks. The Semiconductor Industry Association has released a sobering projection. If the trade conflict intensifies, U.S. chip industry revenues could plunge by over a third by 2027, costing thousands of jobs and billions in lost innovation. Supply chains, already tested by pandemic disruptions, may be stretched to the breaking point. For consumers, this could translate into costlier electronics, longer product cycles, and the real possibility of missing out on the next technological leap. For countries with no horse in the race, the growing complexity of sourcing advanced chips and the pressure to pick a side could undermine national security and economic growth. Meanwhile, the World Trade Organization is working on a report that could shake up the very foundations of tech trade. If the WTO rules that U.S. chip export controls violate global rules, the consequences would ripple through boardrooms and ministries worldwide. Will the rules-based order hold, or are we entering an era where national security trumps global commerce? Amidst all the noise and apprehension, there are rays of opportunity. China's investments in basic science and frontier tech are yielding new talent and ideas. The U.S., for its part, retains a formidable ecosystem of universities, startups, and venture capital. If the two giants ever decide to collaborate again, humanity could see a new golden age of innovation. But if the split hardens, prepare for competing standards in everything from chip architectures to network protocols. Some developing nations may gravitate toward China's tech, lured by lower costs or political alliances. Others will stick with U.S. and allied suppliers, prioritizing security or values. The world may well have to navigate both universes, an expensive, complicated, but not impossible feat. So what does all this mean for you, the viewer, the entrepreneur, the engineer, or simply the global citizen? First, understand that today's policy headlines will shape the technology you're able to use tomorrow. That smartphone upgrade you're eyeing, the electric vehicle you want to buy, or even the laptop powering your career, all depend on chips whose fate is being decided right now in Washington, Beijing, Brussels, and Taipei. If you're in business, diversification is no longer a buzzword, it's a survival strategy. Supply chain resilience, multi-sourcing, and geopolitical risk assessments are now boardroom essentials. Companies that cling to the status quo are playing with fire. Those that invest in alternative suppliers, build in-house technical know-how, and stay agile will be best prepared for the coming storms. For students and professionals in STEM, the lesson is clear. The demand for semiconductor expertise, from materials science to AI software, is exploding. Upskilling in areas like chip design, nanofabrication, or cross-border tech law will open doors to the most dynamic sectors of tomorrow's economy. Those who understand both Western and Chinese systems will be especially valuable as translators and bridge builders. As a citizen, it's vital to stay informed and engaged. These aren't just abstract policy battles. They affect the price of everything from refrigerators to medical devices. Support for science education, public research, and international dialogue is more important than ever. And remember, in a world of fractured tech, digital literacy is self-defense. Understanding how your devices connect, who makes their parts, and what data sovereignty means will empower you to make smarter choices and protect your privacy. Above all, don't buy into fatalism. The future isn't written yet. While the headlines may sound dire, history has shown that rivals can, and often do, find common ground when mutual benefit is clear. The space race of the last century ultimately seeded global satellite communications and peaceful cooperation at the International Space Station. Could the chip war, in time, lead to a new consensus on standards and shared prosperity? It's not out of reach, but it will require vision and courage on both sides. So, let's return to the question we posed at the start. Are we headed for an irreversible decoupling of U.S. and Chinese tech, or is there still hope for compromise and cooperation? The answer, as you've seen, is that both futures are possible, and both are already emerging. The drive for national security, economic edge, and technological pride is powerful. But so too is the global hunger for innovation, connectivity, and shared progress. The coming years will be shaped by the choices of governments, companies, and citizens. Will the world choose rivalry or renaissance? And here's a secret fact few realize. Despite the public hostility, behind closed doors, some of the world's smartest Chinese and American engineers still collaborate in research forums, conferences, and even open-source projects. While politicians argue, science quietly builds bridges, sometimes in defiance of the headlines. If you found this deep dive illuminating, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more breakdowns of the forces shaping our future. What do you think? Can the US and China find a way forward, or are we destined for digital